Hey, what is up, Flav City family? It's Bobby, and on today's Kitchen Basics video, I'm gonna show you how to make the perfect steak at home 4 different ways, which is why I have a mountain of steaks in front of me. This video is gonna be fun. It's gonna be full of cool recipes, cool tips, and really cool techniques to make you a rock star steak pro at home, and I guarantee there's at least 2 or 3 tips that you did not know. So first up, we're gonna do an oven roasted and reverse seared strip steak that is so crusty and perfectly cooked. Then we're gonna do a sous vide steak that is pan seared afterwards and absolutely gorgeous inside. Then we're gonna do a pan-seared steak, finished with lots of butter, garlic, and thyme. And finally, we're gonna do a spice-crusted skirt steak with a zesty salsa verde. So before we get into this beefy action, hook me up, baby. We are making new videos every single week on my channel, and I would love for you to join the Flav City community. All right, so I went to the butcher, and I got all these amazing Aussie grass-fed steaks. We have strip steaks, we have ribeyes, we have skirt steaks. The first method I wanna do is the reverse seared method. So I'm preheating the oven back yonder at 275 degrees. I'm gonna grab a New York strip to start. Let's go for this one right here. Now, the cool thing about this method is that the oven is gonna gently cook the steak first to about 128 degrees, then we'll reverse sear it in a screaming hot cast iron pan later on. The thinking is the sear, or that gray gradient mark, won't go too deep into the meat. Just use any thick cut of steak. So I wouldn't use a skirt steak for this method, but a filet, a ribeye, or a strip steak is perfect. Now, let's season this guy with a good pinch of salt. Did you hear what Art said? He said it's too much salt, but keep going. Season the steak all over. He's setting up the punchline because a lot of people will see this amount of salt and say that's way too much salt for the steak. But I say to you, this is leading us to steak tip number 1. Look how thick this steak is. There's no way we can really season the inside of that beef. So by making a really salty crust, we're gonna carry that salt flavor all the way through. And beef loves steak. They're BFF. It just makes steak taste more salty. So what?
Beef loves steak.
Oh, and beef loves salt. Bobby loves beef. So purist of steak will say salt and pepper is all you need for a good quality steak, which these grass-fed ones are. But you guys know I love spice rubs, so I wanna wash my hands off really quick and just make a really easy spice rub that is gonna sear into the meat and taste so darn good. So let's combine a little bit of smoked paprika, about half a teaspoon of ancho chili powder, half a teaspoon of cumin, and a 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper. Give that a mix up and then season both sides of the steak with the spice rub. And make sure to get it on the side also. And just dip the steak in these spices on the plate. All right, wash your hands again. Now this brings us to another tip for the steak. It's a thick steak, and I said that the salt really doesn't get all the way down into the meat. Well, that wasn't quite true because we have 2 options right now. We can take the steak as is and pop it in that 275 degree oven, or we can do this. Check this out. Last night, I made the steak and seasoned it exactly like I did, and see how the spices have really formed a crust. And what happened is the salt came to the surface, it got mingled with all those spices and went back into the meat. So we basically seasoned the inside of the meat too. I left it exposed on the wire rack like this in my fridge overnight, and that's all you have to do. So it's your choice. It's gonna have a little more flavor if you do this overnight marination. Otherwise, just do it like that. Bring both steaks to room temperature for about 20-30 minutes, and then we're good to go. All right, now before I pop this into the oven, I'm gonna grab a sheet tray that has a wire rack set inside and put the steak down. And Art, this is your area of expertise. Tell me why I'm doing that.
I don't know why I'm an expert, but you're doing it for airflow, man. It's
That's
gonna
right.
give you even heat, and that way less actual pan contact with the steak until the end when you're really doing the pan. At least you're trying to cook the inside.
Exactly,
Yeah,
and it's gonna dry out the exterior of the steak, which will get rid of moisture, and it's gonna make the steak insanely crispy when it hits the pan later on. Oh, you know what? Let's put the probe thermometer in here too. This takes us to like tip number 3. Now, some purists are gonna go a little crazy now in the comments section and say, you never need a probe thermometer or a thermometer when making steak. You should poke it, you should talk to it, you should whisper to it to know when it's ready. Hey, this is a thick piece of steak. I don't wanna guess, I don't wanna overcook it. And if I use a digital probe thermometer and just insert it into the middle of the meat like this, center thickest part of the steak, and then check this out, I can set my probe thermometer to the exact temperature that I wanna cook it to. So for me, that's gonna be about 125, and that allows me to pull the steak at exactly 125. So now we're gonna put it in the 275 degree oven for about, I'm gonna guess 25 minutes. All right, while this steak is doing its thing in the oven, let's move on to the sous vide steak. Let me bring up my sous vide station here. And by the way, big thanks to Aussie Beef and Lamb for supplying me with the beef. I'm gonna be in Australia in late March touring some cattle farms. If you live in Sydney, hook me up. I'm gonna come a few days earlier and I need like a guide to hang out with, show me the good eats. So just contact me if you live in Australia or in Sydney. All right, for the sous vide method, it basically means in French, under vacuum. This is the immersion circulator. This is a big old pot of water. I set the temperature exactly to what I want the steak to cook to. So for me, it was 127 degrees. And I have one in here because I don't think we want to wait 2.5 to 3 hours ahead of time. Anytime I make a steak video, there's also comments that I'm an idiot, I did it completely wrong, or there's a comment that like I overcooked it, but the same steak can be I undercooked it. So there's basically no way to make the perfect steak video, but I hope this one comes as close as possible. Once again, season the strip steak with a generous amount of salt and a few cracks of pepper. Do that on both sides. And then grab a few sprigs of fresh thyme and place that on top of the steak and then close the bag almost all the way. Okay, you'll see that I'm using a zip top bag. Normally when people do sous vide steaks or sous vide anything, they're using vacuum sealed bags, which I actually have in the back room, but I thought it'd be cool to show you that you don't have to buy that piece of equipment. You can just use a good quality zip top bag and what's called a water displacement. So I closed it almost all the way. Now I'm gonna dunk it into the water here, and then I'm gonna push the meat down and all of the air gets forced out by the water, and then I can seal off the zip top bag. All right, so what I'm gonna do is swap that with the other one that's been in there. I like to just clamp it to the edge of the pot. And you know what? The sous vides have become pretty affordable. I'll put the link down below for this one. I think you can get them for like $150 or $200 these days. And it's really good for cooking steak and seafood. And I'm just gonna set a timer for this one for 2.5 to 3 hours, and that'll be done. But like I said, I don't wanna make you wait. So this one has been cooking. Let me open the bag and get a clean plate. And once I pull it out of the bag, you gotta admit, it's not a very attractive looking steak. I mean, it's kind of pale and gray, which is fine. It's cooked perfectly. It's cooked to 127 degrees, but now is the time that we're gonna put it into a screaming hot cast iron pan that I'm preheating back there and get it nice and crusty like we all love. All right, now it's really important to take some paper towels and get all of the moisture off of the steak. I'm talking really pat it down, both sides, on the sides, as much of the moisture as possible. Remember what Art and I said earlier, moisture is the enemy to making a crusty steak. So I wanna make this as dry as possible on the surface before it goes into the cast iron pan. All right, speaking of that, I got one preheating back here. Let's pop it on here. Now I also want a little bit more of like a salty crust. If you didn't think I oversalted before, now you're like, okay, this dude's officially out of control. But a lot of that salt is transferred into the meat, so I wanna create a nice salt and pepper crust. Preheat this guy back over medium-high heat. So add a pinch more salt to the steak, and then add about a tablespoon of avocado oil to the pan. All right, that is what you wanna see. As soon as that oil goes in, just swirl it a bit. Smoking is a good thing in this kitchen, and then put it away from you so the oil splatters on Art and not on me. And then once the meat goes in the pan, just push it down and hold it down for about 5 seconds. That'll make sure the steak is making max contact with the bottom of the pan. All right, we're talking 1 minute. Set a timer if your hands weren't wet, and then flip it after that 1 minute. Also, just put down a little more salt on the other side. So real quick, think about what's going on here. We know the inside is cooked perfectly to 128, which is medium rare. But the outside needs color. So just by cooking it for a minute on each side and then a little bit on the sides, we're gonna get that beautiful golden brown crusty crust and that perfectly juicy pink inside. Okay, after 1 minute, let's flip that steak. Oh yeah, you guys, look at that. How amazing is that crust, and the oil is just crackling and splattering on there. Let's let it go on the second side for 1 minute. All right, let's flip it again on the side. You wanna cook it on those sides so they get nice color too. And I don't know about you, but the color of the steak right now looks absolutely perfect in my opinion. Then let's flip it on the other side too. And then don't forget about the end sides too. The top of the steak for about 20 seconds and the bottom of the steak for about 20 seconds more. And that should do it. Let's get it off of the heat. All right, the steak is done. I wish you could smell this because it's ridiculous. You can see this, we're creating a smoke screen here. Can you see me? It's worth it though, okay? Look at this steak. It is so crusty and golden brown, but this brings us to another tip. Art, please come in here. This is your forte. Please tell everyone why we cannot cut into that steak right now.
If you want your steak to be juicy, you don't want to cut into it because the juices just spill everywhere.
Exactly, the juices are about 140 degrees right now, 130. You cut in, they're gonna rush out like the dam has been broken. So we're gonna wait 5 minutes and then cut into it. All right, let's cut this steak in half. Oh, the knife goes through like butter. Perfect, exactly where I wanted it. Let's slice up the steak into some pieces. Ah, this looks so juicy and delicious, you guys. I love it. All right, it is time to tuck into the steak. And you'll notice if you look at the meat now, about a minute after cutting it, it gets more red and more blushing. All right, Art, I know you're hungry as can be. Get in here. We're gonna try a bite of this, and then the steak in the oven is just about done. You go to town, Art. You guys, the thing about the sous vide is the steak is incredibly juicy, right? It just retains all the moisture, and it's like a juice bomb in your mouth. The salt and pepper crust is great, and that caramelization, that Maillard reaction is money. All right, a couple more bites, and we're gonna pull this guy out of the oven and finish the reverse sear. Okay, you guys, the oven roasted steak was done about 5 minutes ago. I pulled it. Now I want you to see two things. Number one, look at the temperature. I pulled it at 122. It's already carried over to 128, so you have to count with carryover cooking. Anytime you put something in the pan or the oven, pull it 5 to 10 degrees before it's done because it'll keep cooking when it comes out. But look at the exterior. We were talking about making it nice and dry, so it's nice and receptive to the pan to get nice and crusty. Look at that. It's dry and the spices have literally formed a crust. Now I'm gonna grab my pan back here and we can sear this thing. All right, pan is gonna preheat over medium-high heat. If you don't have the oven mitts, I highly recommend them. I got so tired of burning my hands on the racks. I'll put those links down below. Same operation as before. Let's put about a tablespoon of avocado oil in here. You can also use grapeseed oil too, and then we'll go straight into the pan. And then once again, push it down so it's making contact with the bottom of the pan. So similar to the sous vide, we know it's already cooked to the temperature we want because we had the probe in the oven. All we're doing now is getting the cast iron pan sizzling hot, searing for about a minute on each side, and then yanking it. All right, after 1 minute, let's flip the steak. Perfect, nice and crusty. And then same deal, 1 more minute on the second side. That looks good. And then we'll hit the other sides on the top and the bottom. All right, steak is out of the pan. Same deal again. Gonna let it rest 5 minutes so those juices redistribute. And you'll notice it's not as smoky in here. I could actually see you. That's because with the oven roasted technique, first, it dries the surface. So there's less moisture to sizzle and smoke in the pan. Whereas with the sous vide, it was more wet. And that was clearly a lot more smoke, which is why we just opened the door back there to get some fresh air. All right, let's wait a few minutes and then slice into this. All right, time to go into this one. This is the one that sat overnight with the salt and the rub on there, and you can taste it. The seasoning went down into the middle of the beef. So if you have time for that, I highly recommend it. And the crust on this is fantastic too. Maybe not as juicy as the sous vide, but it is a little darker and a little more caramelized. All right, we're not stopping. 2 down, 2 more to go. I think it's time to make the pan-seared ribeye mounted with a ton of butter and garlic and thyme. All right?
All right. That's what I like about steak day. Bobby keeps on cooking and I keep on eating.
All right, let's do it. All right, for the pan-seared technique, I'm preheating the cast iron pan in a 500-degree oven back here because I want the pan to heat up evenly and I want it to retain that heat. The thing about cast iron, which you should use for all these recipes, you can do it in non-stick, but it's just not gonna be quite as good. Cast iron takes a little while to warm up, but once it does, that heat distributes so evenly and nothing, I mean nothing sears steak like cast iron. I always say if it was good enough for Granny, it's good enough for me. So I'm gonna keep that going over medium-high heat. Let's grab a nice ribeye here and mix it up. Let's pinch over a good dusting of salt and pepper on each side. Once again, don't be shy. Make sure that salt and pepper gets all around. Now, drizzle in a good tablespoon of oil to the pan. You're gonna let that heat up for just a minute. Here's the thinking for this method. Start it over medium-high heat, sear it on both sides, and then lower the heat to medium-low and let it gently cook through so that sear mark doesn't go too deep. Okay, let's get that steak in the pan because it's smoking. Push it down, and then 2 minutes. You're gonna let it cook exactly 2 minutes and then flip it. All right, after 2 minutes, give the steak a flip, and that's beautiful. That crust is all about the hot cast iron pan and the room temperature meat. Set a timer for 2 more minutes. All right, the second 2 minutes is up. Let's flip the steak. Beautiful. Now immediately turn the pan down to medium low and set your timer for another 2 minutes. Here's the thinking of this steak. We got the pan really, really hot in the oven. It just made an insanely beautiful crust on both sides. But by lowering the temperature to medium low, we now cook the steak all the way through very gently. Because you know, sometimes you cut into a steak and the sear mark has gone too deep into the meat. It's kind of gray and nasty. That's called the gradient. If we didn't turn the heat down, that would happen here. By doing it over medium-low, we're trying to prevent that from happening. And don't forget, the last minute, I have a whole bunch of butter, a whole bunch of thyme, and some garlic we're gonna put on that steak and just baste it to make it absolutely delicious. So now, take some unsalted butter. You know what, Art was like, do a lot, and I'm like, you know what, why not? I'm gonna put that on top. Art and I recently watched the Thomas Keller Masterclass commercial on YouTube, and he used like double that amount of butter. So go ahead and put some thyme right in the pan, and then take a couple cloves of garlic. And the idea is while it's finishing cooking the last couple minutes, and that butter gets infused with the thyme, it gets infused with the garlic. Because we have the temperature low, we're not burning the butter. If we tried to do this with the previous techniques, it wouldn't work. Those pans were screaming hot, the butter would instantly burn and get really nasty. Because we have the temperature here, over medium-low, we can do it. So just for about 1 minute, keep scooping and basting that steak with the melted butter. The smell of the thyme right now, Art, how good does that smell? Art's getting pumped for this steak, I can tell. He's been waiting for that butter baste all day. And if you don't have a probe thermometer, I really think you should get one. I'll put the link down below. But if you poke the steak in the middle and it feels a little firm but has a little give, it's done. So let's take this one out. And look at that, you guys, right? Steak is done. While it rests for that 5 minutes, the juices are gonna redistribute. The butter is gonna continue melting in there, and that thyme flavor is gonna keep going in there. You know what? Let's take one of these garlics, or both, and just put it on top of there, because this is all about flavor and fattiness and delicious beef. So let's let that do its thing for about 5 minutes, and we'll cut into it. All right, let's slice up this ribeye. Beautiful, but incredibly crusty on the outside and nice and juicy on the inside. Love it. All right, there it is, you guys. This steak looks unbelievable, right? That crusty, crusty top and that pink exterior. Art, get in here. Now listen, for me, this piece right here, the cap of the ribeye, there we go, is my favorite. It is so heavily marbled. It is probably the juiciest, fattiest part of the meat. And with all the butter in there too, it's probably ridiculous.
Hope you're gonna share.
You wanna share this one? Okay, fine. Cut a piece off of there. I was gonna go all caveman on that. Cheers, mate. Oh, God.
That's nice.
Incredibly buttery, beefy, crusty, a nice kind of charred crust. It's unbelievable. Hold on, I want to try one piece from the middle too,
Oh yeah,
just because it's a completely different experience.
completely different animal.
That's right. Awesome. That piece is more rare. So good. All right, one more steak left to do. Spice crusted skirt steak with a salsa verde. Absolutely delicious. Let's do it. All right, let's roll on to the skirt steak. But before we do, this is our official grazing plate. It's been stacked up with lots of steak right now, but Art is hitting the wall, even though I'm not letting him leave the house until he finishes that. All right, for the steak, I have a nice, about a ½ pound piece of outside skirt steak. It's more juicy than the inside, and it's more plump, and it's gonna eat more like a steak. Before we put it on the cast iron pan though, man, now would be the time to have smell-o-vision, because this is my coffee spice rub. We're gonna put it on that skirt steak, and it kind of mimics the flavors of a barbecue joint, or like a smokehouse rub you would put on 2 ribs. It's really easy to make. Here's how you do it. Add just over a tablespoon of freshly ground coffee to a bowl. Then add 1 tablespoon of ancho chili powder, ½ a tablespoon of smoked paprika, ½ a tablespoon of ground cumin, ½ a teaspoon of ground cinnamon, and ½ a teaspoon of ground coriander, 1 tablespoon of light brown sugar, ½ a teaspoon of dried thyme, and about ¼ teaspoon of cayenne pepper. Mix it all up, and it's done. Let's pinch over a good amount of kosher salt, some of the spice rub, and then a little more salt on the other side, and some spice rub. All right, let's grab my cast iron pan back here. It's been preheating. Now, skirt steak is the kind of cut you want to go fast and furious. Whether it's on the grill or in the pan, set it over medium-high heat. You're gonna drizzle in a couple tablespoons of oil. And remember, if the steak is not sizzling like that, take it out, wait 30 more seconds for the oil to heat up, and then get it in. Here's the deal. 3 to 4 minutes on the first side, don't touch it. Let that crust form, let that coffee spice rub seal into that steak, and then we'll flip it. All right, after 3.5 minutes, let's flip the steak. Perfect, nice and crusty. The spices are forming that beautiful crust. Let's let it go another 3 to 4 minutes, and then we'll pull it. All right, let's pull the steak out of the pan. Perfect, and I would highly advise using a splatter guard for this application because that skirt steak likes to splatter everywhere. Now what's cool about this steak is that it's nice and charred and crusty on the outside, but inside it's gonna be really medium rare and nice and blushing pink. But let's push that aside because we don't wanna cut into it immediately. And we're gonna make this really zesty, fresh, herbaceous salsa verde that cuts through all the richness and fattiness in this steak. Let's start with a couple teaspoons of freshly chopped parsley, then go in with a teaspoon of stone ground or Dijon mustard, then grate 1 garlic clove directly into the bowl, then add the zest of half a lemon and the juice of half. Then let's chop up a heaping teaspoon of capers, add those to the bowl, pinch in a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, a few cracks of black pepper, and here's my favorite part. I'm gonna reach for a bottle of really good extra virgin olive oil and glug in about a 1/4 cup, then give it a mix up. This is just so fresh and zesty. You can put this on steak, you can put it on chicken, you can put it on pork chops, but honestly, it's all about really good extra virgin olive oil. This is from the Fresh Pressed Olive Oil Club. Yes, I love olive oil that much that they send me 3 bottles every 3 months from different parts of the world. This is from Australia. Previous quarter was from Chile. Previous was from Italy. It's amazing. They also give me a promo code. You guys can get 1 bottle for $1, no strings attached. I'll put that promo link in the description box. Check that out. All right, this is done. Let's slice up the steak and then hit it up with some of this salsa and try it. When you're slicing skirt steak, it's really important to slice against the grain. So see the way the grain runs from top to bottom here? Don't slice it that way, otherwise the meat's gonna be really tough and chewy. Slice against the grain, a little bit on the bias, and perfect. Now the meat is gonna melt in your mouth, and look at the inside of the meat. Nice and medium rare, and the outside is nice and blackened. And then don't forget to spoon over a generous amount of that zesty salsa verde all over the skirt steak. And I love the look of this, right? It's kind of like brisket is kind of black on the outside and we use the barbecue spice rub, but then inside it's blushing pink. Art, pick up your fork. This is the last taste test of the day.
For real.
Yes, unfortunately, it's come to an end.
Like all good things.
Mm-hmm. Chris Farley say at the Motors Company in Tommy Boy, you can get a good look at a cow by sticking your head up its butt.
But wouldn't you ask Bobby for it instead?
But I'd rather take the butcher or Bobby's word for it. You guys, that is delicious. That coffee and smoked ancho spice rub on the outside has loads of flavor. The meat is juicy and tender, and that salsa verde is acidic and fresh, and Art's new favorite word?
Herbaceous.
Herbaceous. All right, guys, that is it. All the recipes are down below. If you want a meal prep or a recipe to make with the skirt steak, I have a skirt steak meal prep with roasted sweet potato fries and Brussels sprouts. I also have a sous vide strip steak recipe with cream of spinach. I'll put that recipe down below. Share this video. Art and I worked really hard on this. We still have a mountain of steak left to eat at the end here. All the recipes and techniques are down below. If you want to see 2 more awesome videos, check the one streaming below us right now. But we will see you next week. Until then, hashtag keep on cooking, mad love, peace. Later.